Hello, in this video I make a new workbench.
You're joking. Not another one? Oh, for God's sake, I can't stand this.
Okay, so let me explain. Last summer I made this foldable workbench so I could work outside the loft when it was way too hot to work inside. And now this summer has started, I thought it would be really good if I could adapt this bench to give me even more features. I'm not really building a new bench, I'm just building a new top for the old bench. Since I bought my Festool Track-saw, I've never used my saw sled. So for the majority of components for this new build, I'm going to steal the parts off that saw sled. The top is made from two pieces of 12mm MDF. I bought these at my local shop in 2x4 foot sheets. The sheets were cut down to form a 100mm stagger, so I have a small top and a large top. These were laminated together to form a 24mm overall thickness top. The glue spreader is an old piece of hardboard, and whilst they dried overnight I placed some clamps around the perimeter and a couple of screws in the centre, hoping I'd hit the spot where the router insert plate would be. The existing bench top has some holes cut into it, so it locates around the frame. So to transfer these cutouts to the new top, it was just a case of placing the old top on the underside of the new top and using a router with a bearing cutter. Then it was just a case of squaring those holes out with my chisel. So to set everything out on this bench top, I'm going to use my UK jig path guide and put the holes in at the 96mm centres. And then from this matrix of holes I will then insert everything else I need. And once I got my bench top set out, I could then trim the two long edges and the short edge with my track saw. I can now mark out the plate position for the router table. Note I'm using my track saw rail and square to make sure everything is nice and aligned. Once I was happy with its position, it was just a case of taping some MDF strips around it to form a guide for the router. And I seem to have bought the worst double-sided sticky tape ever. Is it just me that has trouble peeling the back off this tape? After all this faffing about with the tape, I lost confidence in it, so I also put a couple of brad pins in each piece just to make sure it wouldn't move about. Then it was just a case of running the router around the guide, twice with the guide on, and then finally removing the guard and using the bearing just to rest against the inside of the hole in the top. The cutter I'm using here is 3/4 of an inch in diameter. In reality I need one much bigger, 1.5 inches, to match the radius on the ends of the Kreg plate. But since I didn't have one of them, I just had to settle with a slight hole in each corner. But once I got the hole cut out, the next stage was to mark out the positioning of the T-tracks, one at each side and one along the length. The nosings around the bench top is made from some 1x2 timber. These are attached to the bench with my biscuit jointer and then glued and clamped for a few hours. I didn't have enough long clamps for this, so I used the glue up bars I made a few weeks ago as well. To router the grooves in the bench top, I set the depth stop to the thickness of the T-track and then use my Festool guide and the Triton slider to router in the grooves. The 19mm router cutter that I used earlier is the same one I used here and is the perfect width for the T-tracks I'm using across the bench. And when routing into the bench, I clamped a piece of timber to the bench top to act as a stop. The T-track that runs down the bench is much wider than the other two, so I had to router this in 2 goes. The T-track just runs the length of the longer top. Firstly, I routed a groove right down the length of this top, and then with a little bit of trial and error just widened the groove enough until the track fitted, and then completed the cut. To ensure that the top is perfectly level, I glued and screwed some cleats to the bench frame so I could be sure it located itself in the same place every time. The next stage is to complete the nosings of the bench top and also sort out the smaller end. So the nosing on the left hand side was cut between the 2 longer nosings and would be fixed on with glue and biscuits in the same manner as the sides. The nosing to the right hand would be around 3 inches longer than the one on the left hand side. The reason why I'm making a smaller end on the top is so I can interchange it with other small tops that each have a different function. And for those viewers who are a similar or maybe slightly older age to myself, think of this bench as Thunderbird 2 and think of this little bench as Thunderbird 4, and it may be replaced with the mole or other accessories as the bench progresses. Once the glue on the left hand nosing had cured, it was just a case of trimming off the excess front and back nosing. The smaller table will be supported at the ends by an R-flap cutting the front and back nosings and the side nosing. I got the overlaps to seat properly. It was a case of trimming off some of the overhang between the 2 tops. This would then form a pocket for a sacrificial wood to sit in when I'm using my crosscut station. So I made a bit of a mistake. When I cut the groove for the T-bar, I didn't tighten the depth stop on the router enough. Subsequently, I cut way too deep. So to remediate this, I filled the groove with 2-part filler and covered my T-bar in some cling film while it's set. I could have edited this bit out, but I thought it was important to share my mistakes. So I could lock the 2 tables together, I inserted some threaded inserts into the end of the nosings, and then by using a bolt I could fasten the smaller table into the larger table. The whole idea of this bench was so I could work outside when it was too hot to work inside. But here I ended up working inside because it was hotter than a cup of McDonald's coffee outside. At this stage I introduced the bench to its first coat of sanding. And the next stage was to insert the T-bars. And because they were a tight fit, I just had to send them home, as Drew Fisher would say, with some taparoonies. And the T-bars are just held in place with some 1/2 inch screws. I decided to support my router table by using these Kreg insert plate levelers. Now I'm not going to go into the process here because my last video covered that, and I'll put the link up in the top right hand corner should you want to see that. But in essence I decided to use these because I thought it would give me more future flexibility, as I can change this plate out without relying on the exact dimension a rebate would have given me. I now need to open these 3mm holes up to the 20mm diameter to accept any dogs and some other accessories that I have. Now I'm not going to open every hole up, I'm going to leave some 3mm holes as reference points for when I build a new extension to the side table. Then I can use my steel rulers to transfer these dimensions across. And to clean these holes up, and also the perimeter of the table, I ran my router with a chamfer bit around the inside of the holes and around the outside of the table. So I didn't spoil my router bit, I finished the chamfers off to the T-bars with a chisel. Okay, just to finish off, take it back outside, install the top, and give the whole thing a final sand. And to try and preserve the top, I gave the whole thing a coat of some clear polyurethane varnish. And learning from my previous mistake of not letting the varnish set within the doggo. So there we are, this phase is done. There's a sacrificial insert sits in this groove. This is where my Benchdog square and track will fit, along with my Benchdog fence. Not only do I have outdoor cutting capabilities, but I also have outdoor routering capabilities, which I will explore more in another video. Also push my cutting station to the right to overhang the bench for when doing inaccurate cuts or just speed cutting something to length. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to see more, here are a couple of handpicked videos just for you.